What if I told you that the exhaustion you feel is not a failure of will, not a moral weakness, not a sign that you lack discipline or drive, but something far older and far wiser than the voice that accuses you of being lazy? What if the heaviness in your body, the fog in your mind, the way you pull away from obligations and noise, and the endless demands of a world that never stops moving, what if all of that is not resistance, but recognition? A deep, instinctive knowing that something essential has been neglected. Not your productivity, not your output, but your soul. There's a kind of tiredness that sleep does not fix. You know this already. You have tried resting your body, tried lying down, tried scrolling through distractions until your eyes blur, and still the exhaustion remains. It sits in your chest. It clouds your thoughts. It makes even small tasks feel impossibly heavy. And the world around you, the voices outside and sometimes inside, they tell you the same thing over and over. You are being lazy. You are not trying hard enough. You are wasting time. You are falling behind. But what if they are wrong? What if the language we have been given to describe our inner states is so impoverished, so focused on production and performance, that it cannot recognize the difference between laziness and depletion, between avoidance and self-preservation, between giving up and finally, quietly, listening to something that has been trying to speak to you for a very long time? Carl Jung spoke often about the inner world, about the vast territory that exists beneath the surface of our daily lives. He understood that not everyone lives primarily in the outer world, in the realm of action and social engagement and visible achievement. Some of us are oriented inward, not by choice exactly, but by nature, by design. And for those who live this way, the inner world is not an escape. It is not a retreat from reality. It is where reality becomes most vivid, most true, most demanding. When you're someone who lives inwardly, when your energy flows toward reflection and meaning and the quiet processing of experience, the outer world can become unbearably loud, not just in volume, but in expectation. It asks you to be present in ways that drain you. It asks you to perform a version of yourself that feels hollow. It asks you to keep moving, keep producing, keep engaging, even when your inner world is crying out for attention, for stillness, for space to breathe. And when you finally stop, when you can no longer keep up the pace, when you withdraw into silence and solitude, the judgment comes. From others, from yourself. You are lazy. You are unmotivated. You are wasting your potential. But what if the truth is something else entirely? What if your soul, that deep and often wordless part of you, is asking for rest? Not the rest of the body, though that matters too, but the rest that comes from being seen, from being allowed to exist without justification, from being held in a space where you do not have to perform or explain or defend your way of being. This is not a small thing. It is not indulgence. It is not weakness. It is a fundamental need, as real as hunger, as urgent as thirst. And when it is ignored, when it is pushed down beneath layers of obligation and guilt and the relentless pressure to keep going, something inside you begins to shut down. Not because you're broken, but because you're protecting yourself. Because the soul, when it is not given what it needs, will find a way to take it. It will slow you down. It will make you heavy. It will pull you away from the noise and the demands and the endless performance. And it will force you, sometimes painfully, to stop. Maybe you have felt this. Maybe you have experienced the strange paradox of being exhausted and restless at the same time. Too tired to engage with the world, but too agitated to truly rest. You lie down, but your mind races. You try to relax, but guilt gnaws at you. You want to do nothing, but doing nothing feels unbearable because you have been taught that your worth is measured by what you produce, by how much you accomplish, by how well you meet the expectations of a world that does not understand the inner life. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to meet the world. It is not false, exactly, but but it is not the whole truth either. It is the version of ourselves we present to others, the role we play to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid conflict or judgment. And for many of us, especially those who are deeply introverted or inwardly focused, maintaining the persona is exhausting. It requires constant effort, constant vigilance, constant suppression of the parts of ourselves that do not fit the script. And so we grow tired, not just physically, but spiritually. We grow tired of pretending. We grow tired of performing. We grow tired of the gap between who we are and who we are expected to be. And eventually, if we do not listen, if we do not honor that tiredness, it becomes something more. It becomes burnout. It becomes depression. It becomes a profound disconnection from ourselves, a sense that we are living someone else's life, that we are moving through the world like ghosts, present but not alive. But here is what the world will not tell you, what the voices of productivity and achievement and relentless forward motion cannot afford to acknowledge. Stopping is not the same as failing. Withdrawing is not the same as giving up. Needing rest, deep and soulful rest, is not a sign that you are weak or broken or less than. It is a sign that you are human. It is a sign that you have been carrying more than you are meant to carry, that you have been moving faster than your soul can follow, that you have been living in a way that does not honor the truth of who you are. And who are you? Not the persona, not the role you play at work or in social settings or in the endless performance of daily life, but the deeper self, the one that exists beneath all of that, the one that feels and thinks and dreams and questions and struggles to make sense of a world that often feels alien and overwhelming. That self, the one Jung called the true self, the one that emerges through the long and difficult process of individuation. That self needs something different than what the outer world demands. It needs silence. It needs solitude. It needs time to wander without purpose, to think without conclusion, to feel without explanation. It needs to be allowed to exist without having to justify its existence, without having to prove its worth through productivity or achievement or social approval. It needs, in other words, to rest. Not the rest of sleep, though sleep is important, but the rest that comes from being allowed to be fully and completely, without apology. This is what your soul is asking for. This is what the exhaustion is trying to tell you. Not that you are lazy, not that you are failing, but that you have been living out of alignment with yourself. That you have been giving too much to the outer world and not enough to the inner one. That you have been trying to meet expectations that were never meant for you, that were designed for a different kind of person, a different way of being. And the world will resist this. It will tell you that you're being selfish, that you are avoiding responsibility, that you are indulging in self-pity or navel-gazing or some other dismissive term meant to shame you back into compliance. But the world, for all its noise and certainty, does not understand the inner life. It does not understand that for some of us, the most important work happens in silence, in solitude, in the slow and often invisible process of making sense of our experience, of integrating what we have lived, of becoming more fully ourselves. Jung understood this. He spent much of his life exploring the unconscious, the vast and mysterious realm that exists beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. He understood that the unconscious is not just a repository of forgotten memories or repressed desires, but a source of wisdom, of creativity, of guidance. It speaks to us in dreams, in symbols, in sudden insights that seem to come from nowhere. And it speaks to us, too, in the body, in feelings of exhaustion or restlessness or longing that we cannot quite name. When you feel exhausted for no clear reason, when you feel the need to withdraw even though nothing dramatic has happened, when you feel a deep resistance to the demands of the outer world, it is worth asking, what is my unconscious trying to tell me? What part of myself have I been ignoring? What need have I been suppressing in order to keep up, to fit in, to meet the expectations of others. Often, the answer is simple, though not easy. You need rest. Not just physical rest, but psychological and spiritual rest. You need time away from the noise, time away from the demands, time away from the performance. You need time to reconnect with yourself, to remember who you are beneath all the roles and obligations and expectations. You need time to grieve what you have lost, to process what you have experienced, to make space for what wants to emerge. And this is not laziness. Laziness is avoidance without awareness, a refusal to engage with life out of fear or apathy. What you are experiencing is something different. It is a deep, instinctive pull towards something essential, something that cannot be found in the outer world, something that requires stillness and solitude and the courage to turn inward even when the world is telling you to keep moving. There is a kind of person who feels this more acutely than others. Not better, not worse, but different. These are the people who have always felt a little out of step with the world, who have always needed more time alone, more time to think, more time to process. These are the people who find small talk exhausting, who feel drained by social obligations, who would rather have one deep conversation than a dozen shallow ones. These are the people who are often misunderstood, often judged, often seen as cold or distant or arrogant, when in truth they are simply oriented differently, wired for depth rather than breadth, for meaning rather than distraction. If you are one of these people, you know the cost of living in a world that does not value what you value, that does not understand what you need, that constantly asks you to be someone you are not. You know the exhaustion that comes from pretending, from performing, from trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for you. And you know, too, the guilt that comes when you finally stop, when you finally withdraw, when you finally admit that you cannot keep going the way you've been going. But here is what you must understand, what you must allow yourself to believe, even when the voices of judgment are loud. There is nothing wrong with you. Your need for solitude is not a defect. Your need for depth is not a weakness. Your need for rest, real rest, soul rest, is not laziness. It is a sign that you're listening to something deeper than the demands of the outer world, something that knows what you need even when you do not, something that will not let you continue to live in a way that betrays who you are. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming more fully yourself. It is not a destination. It is not something you achieve and then check off a list. It is a path, often winding, often difficult, that requires you to turn away from the collective, from the expectations and judgments of others, and turn toward your own inner truth. It requires you to honor what you feel, even when it does not make sense to others. It requires you to trust that the exhaustion, the withdrawal, the need for rest, is not a failure, but a necessary part of the journey. And it is a lonely path at times, because most people do not understand it. Most people are oriented outward, toward action and achievement and social connection. They do not feel the same pull toward the inner world, the same need for solitude and reflection. And so they judge what they do not understand. They see your withdrawal as rejection. They see your need for rest as laziness. They see your depth as pretension or self-indulgence. But their judgment is not the truth. It is projection. It is their discomfort with something they cannot relate to, something that challenges their own way of being. And while their judgment can hurt, while it can make you doubt yourself, it does not change the reality of who you are and what you need. You need rest. You need silence. You need time to be alone with yourself, to reconnect with the parts of you that have been neglected, to listen to the voice that has been drowned out by the noise of the world. And this is not something to apologize for. It is not something to feel guilty about. It is something to honor, something to protect, something to give yourself permission to claim. Because the truth is, the world needs people like you. It needs people who think deeply, who feel deeply, who are willing to turn inward and face the difficult questions that most people avoid. It needs people who value meaning over distraction, authenticity over performance, depth over superficiality. But you cannot offer those gifts if you are exhausted, if you are depleted, if you are running on empty because you've been trying to live according to someone else's rules. So when the exhaustion comes, when the heaviness settles over you, when you feel the pull to withdraw, do not fight it. Do not shame yourself. Do not listen to the voices that tell you that you are lazy or weak or failing. Instead, listen to the deeper voice, the one that knows what you need, the one that is asking, quietly but insistently, for rest. Not the rest of escape, but the rest of return. Return to yourself. Return to what matters. Return to the inner world that has been waiting for you, patiently, all along. And as you rest, as you allow yourself the time and space to be still, something will begin to shift. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, gradually, you will begin to feel more like yourself. The fog will lift. The heaviness will ease. The sense of disconnection will soften. Not because you have conquered your laziness or forced yourself back into productivity, but because you have honored what your soul was asking for. You have given yourself what you needed. And in doing so, you have reconnected with the source of your vitality, your creativity, your sense of purpose. This is the paradox that the world does not understand. That rest is not the opposite of productivity. That withdrawal is not the opposite of engagement. That stopping is not the opposite of moving forward. Sometimes, rest is what allows you to move forward in a way that is true to who you are. Sometimes, withdrawal is what allows you to engage more deeply, more authentically when you return. Sometimes, stopping is the only way to change direction, to realign yourself with your own inner truth. And so you rest, not forever, not as an escape, but as a necessary pause, a sacred pause, a pause that honors the reality that you're not a machine, that you're not designed to run endlessly without stopping, that you are a human being with an inner life that is as real and as important as anything you do in the outer world. Jung believed that the unconscious compensates for the one-sidedness of consciousness. When we live too much in the outer world, too much in action and performance and social engagement, the unconscious pulls us inward, toward reflection, toward solitude, toward rest. It does this not to punish us, but to restore balance, to remind us that we are more than what we do, that we are more than the roles we play, that we are, at our core, beings of depth and complexity and mystery. And when we listen to that pull, when we honor it instead of resisting it, something profound happens. We begin to live more authentically. We begin to make choices that reflect our true values, our true needs, our true selves. We begin to let go of the expectations that were never ours, the obligations that drain us, the relationships that do not nourish us. We begin, slowly and often painfully, to individuate, to become who we were always meant to be. This does not mean that life becomes easy. It does not mean that the world suddenly understands you, or that the judgments stop, or that you never feel tired again. But it does mean that the tiredness changes. It is no longer the exhaustion of betraying yourself, of living out of alignment with who you are. It is the natural tiredness that comes from living fully, from engaging deeply, from giving yourself to what matters. And in that tiredness, there's a kind of peace, a sense that you're living your own life, not someone else's, a sense that you are honoring the truth of who you are, even when it is difficult, even when it is lonely, even when the world does not understand. So when you feel exhausted, when you feel the pull to withdraw, when you feel the need for rest, do not call it laziness. Do not shame yourself. Do not force yourself to keep going in a direction that does not serve you. Instead, stop, listen, ask yourself what your soul is asking for, and then, with as much courage and compassion as you can muster, give it to yourself. Because you're not lazy. You are not broken. You are not failing. You are simply human, and your soul is asking for rest. And that is not a weakness. It is a wisdom, a deep, instinctive wisdom that knows what you need, even when the world does not, even when you do not. Trust it, honor it, and in doing so, you will begin to find your way back to yourself, back to the life that is waiting for you, back to the quiet, steady truth that has been there all along.